This month, the Best of Bookmark focuses on authors that have proven quite popular with our audience. This week, Sister Briege McKenna shares inspiring stories in her book, The Power of the Sacraments. And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host, with a very, very special guest, Sister Briege McKenna, OSC, author of The Power of the Sacraments, published by Servant Books. This is a great honor, great pleasure to have you back here on EWTN's Bookmark, let alone here on EWTN. It's always a pleasure to see you, Sister.
Thank you, Doug. It's a joy to be back with you.
You remind me in some ways like Father Groeschel. I used to always say it was always difficult to get him in one place long enough to be able to do a series or do a show. You need a GPS attached to you to track all the places you go around the world.
Well, I travel a lot, but I try to stay at home. Good weather, when it's bad in Europe, I'm in Florida. I try. But yes, I travel about 9 to 10 months of the year.
Well, it's amazing to me because I think you're in Florida because the Fountain of Youth is there and you obviously have discovered it.
No, Doug.
I think so.
My Fountain of Youth is Jesus.
Right.
And I spend time in Eucharistic adoration and I tell people he's the best. Radium treatment, everything.
Right. Well, your classic miracles do happen. God can do the impossible, of course. And I always think of Mother Angelica talking about us doing the ridiculous so that God can do the impossible. But this is a classic. Miracles do happen. And we've always had this, and it's a great book for anybody who hasn't. But this is a new book, The Power of the Sacraments. It's a little book,
yes,
but it really is packed with a lot. Where did this idea come from?
Well, you know, Doug, I just love the sacraments, and you know, when Jesus healed me back in 1970. I fell in love with the Catholic Church. Well, I fell in love with Jesus, and then I fell in love with my Catholic faith. And I used to think, you know, how could anybody leave the sacraments? You know, and I was always this desire to tell people about it. And then one day I got up very early in the morning time, and I spent many hours in prayer. I was going to give a talk. And it was like the whole talk on the sacraments just came to me. And shortly after that, one of the daughters of St. Paul contacted me and she said, you know, this is just a talk that we would love to transcribe, you know, and put. So I did, but it wasn't very well done. We just did it, you know, kind of thinking, I didn't know how it was going to go. But then they gave me back, they said, well, we're not going to do anything with it anymore. And I thought, really? You know, I'm going to, Jackie, my secretary, myself talked about it and I prayed. And so I re-edited it and I got Servant Books and it's doing wonderful. I changed some things, you know, put new stories in it, and it's small, but then people, like in the RCIA and people who are coming into the Catholic faith, don't need big books.
Yeah, it's interesting, and obviously in the world we live today, you know, this is great because it is the kind of thing that people don't see as overwhelming. It's something you can pick up and read, and you can read sections of it, right? Yeah,
and you know, Doug, I'm not a theologian, or I, you know, started off as a first grade teacher, and I love stories because stories relate, and I have a lot of stories, and I thought, if I don't write them down soon, I'm going to forget them, because the older you get, the stories. And that's why it was amazing, the same as with miracles do happen. Each sacrament, the stories just flooded my mind of events and things that happened. And so that's how it came about, and it's doing very well. I just got a few days ago, got a call from France. They're putting it into French.
Oh, really?
It's in German. It's in Croatian.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
It's just out less than a year, you know.
Right. And here we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day. And in the introduction, you say the sacraments are so much a part of our Catholic life that sometimes we take them for granted if we take the time to think about them. I wonder whether we take the time to think about them at all. Is that part of the problem? Is that a general statement about the faith for many Catholics today?
Yes. I think one of the greatest needs in the Catholic Church today is adult education. You see, the wonderful thing about converts, people who come into the Catholic faith, they have to go to the RCIA and they're curious, they want to know. We who are born into the Catholic faith, as a child you often are introduced to the sacraments, but it's like force of habit. It's like going, you go to Mass because that's the thing you do. And even with the Sacrament of Reconciliation, you know, I think people don't fully understand what it is, and that it's the most powerful encounter with Jesus. The same with, you know, the anointing of the sick. I have become very conscious of the miracles. Miracles that have happened through the anointing of the sick.
Right, it's amazing. You talk about several of them in the book, actually.
And you see, that's why when I meet Catholics, who say to me, well, I left the church because it's boring. I say, what? Are you crazy? How could they? Do you know? And then I start telling them, or they say it to me on the phone, and you'll hear them saying, wow, I didn't really know that. Or they'll say, you know, sister, I'd love to touch you. I said, why would you want to touch me? Every day you can touch Jesus, he's alive. And that's why I think, Doug, people have contacted me and said, oh, I love your little book because it makes the sacraments I didn't know, or even if I did know, I need reawakening.
Do you think there was also a certain amount of, it seems to be, and I think it's changed a lot, and it's changing, and I think you're fairly positive in your sense in this book about where the church is going, that maybe for a period of time, for some reasons, the sacraments were maybe a little bit downplayed?
Well, I think, you know, I work with clergy worldwide, and I love the priesthood, and I've been ministering to priests for 30-some years. And I tell them that if you are going to be an insurance agency, you have to convince the people that this insurance is worth buying. Well, you see, if you're not convinced of the sacraments, it's very hard to get up on a Sunday morning and preach about them. And I tell the priests, look, at every young person, a lot of young people are going to university to study marketing. And why are they studying marketing? To come out and tell us about things we don't need at all. And I said, the Catholic Church, we need, as priests and religious and Catholics, need to learn how to market our Catholic faith, because if we are convinced of it, and see, I'm totally convinced. So when people say, well, I'm not sure, you know, maybe there's some non-Catholics here. I say, but they'd love to hear about us.
And we don't want to make anybody feel bad.
Yeah, you don't want to make people feel bad. And I remember one day a priest said to me, he invited me to speak in his parish, and he said, now, Briege, be very careful, because the first 3 rows are Pentecostals. And because he asked me, what's your topic? And I said, the healing power of the Eucharist. And he said, well, you know, be careful, because, you know, there's... So I looked at him and I said, oh, I'll be very careful, Father. And then I got up and I said, now, for those who are not Catholic, and so I gave my talk and I told them exactly what Catholics believe. When it was all over, those 3 rows were lapsed Catholics who went off to the Pentecostal to get a high. And they came, many of them crying, and said to me, you know, because I told lots of stories about the sacrament. And that's why, when you ask me that question about the sacraments, you know, do people maybe downplay sometimes? I'm convinced that we have to go back to the early apostles. You think about it, Doug. When the apostles started out to evangelize, I mean, they were so convincing that, and I was in Korea some years ago giving a retreat, and this little nun was my translator. And she told me that she was a Buddhist. And she was at Women's University, and a Irish Colombian priest came. She couldn't speak a word of English hardly, and this priest came to talk to the students about Christianity. She said, I didn't know a word he was saying, but he was so enthusiastic and so excited about whatever he was talking about. She said, do you know that 6 of us in the class give our lives completely, converted, and became nuns? Because he transmitted enthusiasm and conviction.
Right. Well, one of the things that struck me, you were saying earlier, and I always remembered, I think it's from your book, Miracles Do Happen, it's all true. Was that a line that you used?
Yes.
I always remember that striking me, as impacting me as well, when you came to realize that everything you learned was really true.
Yes. Well, you know, I prayed before my own healing, because I understand people doubt. Everybody doubts. And you know, I read this book over and over again, called John Harding's book on the Eucharist, Father John Harding, you know.
Great, and, Father John.
Yeah, Father John, you know, he was a saint. Anyway, I haven't canonized. Anyway, but you know, I read that book, I give it out in hundreds. And I say, if you know, when you think about it, he keeps saying this is true. And then when you go back into history and the heresies and how all the ways that the church, every heresy the church came back and confronted. And that's why we have such a strong teaching from it. So I think, you know, one of the blessings that has happened to me is since my own healing and since that conversion, the Lord has led me to some great authors who fire me all up again. Or priests, you know, because I mean, I've heard so many beautiful teachings on the sacraments.
Well, let me ask you, in the book you say, in life we set out on 2 journeys. What do you mean 2 journeys?
Well, the moment of conception, when and I was thinking about this the other day, when I was at the dentist, I was thinking, how could anybody say there's not a God? He makes such intricate people with teeth, everything. The moment you are conceived, you begin a physical journey. 9 months in the womb, right? And then you leave the womb. You wouldn't want to leave it, but you have no choice. And you start that physical journey towards back to the Creator. And all during that time, your mother, you're fed, you're nurtured, all that. But at baptism, we begin a spiritual inner journey. And we have another mother, we have the mother of the church. And the church, which is our mother, has provided for us for every need we have. And think about it, Doug, the church is the only institution, the Catholic Church today, where you can be guaranteed the truth. And it's not by popular opinion and all those things. And if you follow the teaching magisterium of the church, it will feed you the truth. You go to, you know, in the Psalms it talks about a mother, about the child at the breast. You know, well, we are fed like at the breast of the church because we receive the sacrament of the Eucharist, confession, all these sacraments. And what is that for? And the rituals, the beautiful celebrations like of benediction and you know, the Mass as it is now, all of that ritual and everything is not for our outer lives. Like, people forget the value the Mass on the music, the altars, the flowers, and I say, but it's not really about all those things. It's about the mystery, what happened, the cross, the passion, death, and it's your inner life. That when you receive Holy Communion, it does help you physically and psychologically, but it's to feed the supernatural life of your soul. And that's what I mean. So you journey, and think about it. At baptism, the first thing that the church, you're cleansed, you're nurtured, when you're sick, you go to the doctor, but when you're sick in the soul, you go to the priest for confession. When you're hungry, you eat. When you need hunger for the soul, you're fed of the Eucharist. So you could go through each one of them, and that's what I mean.
And exactly how you explain it in a very basic way so people can understand that. One other thing struck me, you talked about, you were on a radio show and someone asked you, what about the pagans? Will those people who have not been baptized be saved? And you say, yes, they can be saved, but then you go on to say, what I really anguish over is the people who hear the saving word of God and reject it.
Yes, that's a favorite question. See, people always say, what about all those people that you know, are pagan or, you know, with sin and catastrophes?
Is it fair that they wouldn't?
And of course, I am convinced, there's no doubt in the basic goodness of, there's in all people, of course, the Creator stamp is there, because you couldn't be made if you didn't. God, who made us, you know? And I don't think we came from monkeys and all this stuff they tell us about, you know. But anyway, when, so this basic goodness, and if you ever saw that movie, I don't remember the title of it, where the bottle fell from the sky, the Coke bottle.
Right, sure.
And all those people were beautiful to each other.
The gods must be crazy.
The gods must be crazy. It was only when they got this thing that they all start fighting over. Well, you know, basically, people have a goodness in them, those tribal people. And you see, then along comes, you know, we hear the gospel preached. Now, the people who hear the gospel, what Jesus said himself, and reject it, I worry more about them. And I worry more about people. You see, a lot of people leave the Catholic Church, and I don't blame them. I used to judge them because they don't really know about it. And that is the part that I think in my ministry to clergy, I pray, and I pray for myself, for the gift of zeal. Because, you know, when I was a little girl, my grandmother and my parents, we talked about, you know, you'd hear people saying, we have to work for the salvation of souls and zeal for God, you know, and so. Well, you see, I can make a difference in the salvation of those people. And the priest on a Sunday morning, or when he does make a difference in the difference between ignorance and the knowledge of, and introduce them to Jesus. So they're the people that I'm concerned, the people who should know the truth,
right,
but are not evangelized.
Right. Now, let me understand this. What do sacraments and veins have to do with one another?
Well, you know, the sacraments, if I remember, I haven't read the book, but if I remember, I said that veins are very important because all these fellas who have heart attacks and have clogged veins
right,
and pass out,
right,
and some die. Well, you see, if our lives, the sacraments are like the veins carrying the power of God to us and renewing us. And if we cut them off, it's like when you cut off your veins to your heart,
right,
and we pant and we puff. You ever notice people who are short of breath,
right,
and their lungs and everything? Well, you see, I believe it's the same with Catholics, that Benedict Rochelle used to say, the world can be full of nice people, but nice people don't burn at the stake. You know, you need vibrant, and see, I think that's, if you are healthy physically and your veins are working, the blood is circulating and everything's
right,
going, if the
and
same
that's really what
spirit.
the sacraments do in your
spiritual
life.
They keep you healthy,
Healthy.
and they keep you, well, you'll die for the Lord.
Now, you say in the Sacrament of Reconciliation, you talk about the fact that we get spiritually sick. And what was interesting, you said, what was the very first gift that Jesus bestowed on the disciples after the resurrection? What was it?
Forgiveness. He breathed on the disciples and he said, whose sins you shall forgive, they are forgiven. That was the first fruit. That's why he died. And that's why when New Agers and all these people say, oh, you know, you don't sin, you know, it's negative, you don't have to feel bad. And I'll say, what? Look at a crucifix. Contemplate a crucifix. That's why Jesus died. And he died to redeem us and save us from sin and death. And the very first thing he did, which wasn't he fantastic,
right,
give the power
right,
to priests.
Well, this jumped out at me. You said, by sin we can't hurt God.
No, you can't hurt God. And that's why you go to confession. You know, people say, I don't go to confession, I go right to God. You know, that's the easy cop-out. But we hurt each other. And Jesus said that, you know, and God is, we don't hurt God because he's God, but we hurt his people because what you do to me, you're doing to God. So it's like, you know, a lot of times I say to people that, you know, they'll say to me, I'll never forgive that person. And I say, well, you know, what Jesus will say, well, then I can't forgive you, you have to forgive.
Right.
And say, but it's nothing to do with God. I said, of course it has.
Right, exactly. Now, you say here also, this struck me, he said, God in his great wisdom has given us this sacrament through the church. He asks us to humble ourselves. Is that one of the reasons also why people don't go to confession, because it has to do with humility?
No, it has to do with pride, I think. Yes, it has to do, put it the other way.
Right.
Yeah, because it's hard to go to confession, you know.
Lack of humility, I should have said.
Yeah, lack of humility.
Right.
Yeah, I had a beautiful experience just a couple of months ago. My brother Pether, whom I love, who is not well, we went to his house, and he's a little country man, and all his friends who were different degrees of sickness were there. And Father Kevin came to say Mass, and he said, now he said, if anybody'd like to go to confession, this is in a country house, you see, and all these little farmers are looking at each other. And you know, the typical saying that you hear people saying is, I never be out, I never sin. Think you have to be out, you know, and about. But I watched them, and it was hilarious, because they'd go into Father Kevin in a bedroom and they'd come out and they'd say, oh, by God, he's wonderful. Go in there, it's a great thing. You get a load off your mind. And I could hear this laughing. But you know, I thought a lot has to do with the priest too. How the priest is, and you see, Father Kevin will never, ever refuse. He said Jesus spoke to him one day when he was walking in to celebrate Mass in a stadium with 30,000 and all these priests. And this man stepped out of the crowd and said to him, "Father, could I go to confession?" And he said, "Right here?"
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Could you wait till afterwards?" Because he was about to say, and as he walked one step away, he heard the Lord say, "No, he can't wait, go back. I want it now." So he said to the priest, "Just wait." And that man's life was changed. He had been away from it, was changed forever. And that's why I think that sacrament, you know, it takes humility, but God gives the grace, you know. Now the other thing that I'll tell you is that just recently I just came back from Italy. Was it Italy or Switzerland? One of the places where we were given a priest retreat. 3 priests were healed physically at confession. Physically.
Right, you talk about that.
Yeah,
about
this
the
only happened.
physical aspect
This
of
only
being
happened,
healed in confession.
yeah.
You think of like anointing of the sick, maybe, but not confession.
Yeah, this only happened a month ago, 2 months ago in Europe, and the priests we were there was confession, and it was all Switzerland. It was in Switzerland, and they had different languages, of course. And Father Kevin, was through a translator. Sometimes they'll go with the priest, a translator, which is unusual. But 3 priests got up at the end and said they'd like to give testimony, and 3 of them had physical healings, and said it happened when they were at confession. You know, so, but why would be surprised?
Were they
Doug?
the most surprised people there?
Yes. But you know, I said to them afterwards, I said, "Why are you surprised? Don't you believe Jesus comes?"
Right. Well, you say, and look, you say, today people are going to confession, but in pubs, to the bartender, beauty salons, to hairdressers. But you say you hear confessions.
Oh, all the time.
How does that work?
Well, it doesn't, but I hear them anyway.
Okay. But you can't give absolution.
Yes, I hear well, what does it mean? I sit on planes and I hear all kinds of horror stories of suffering and their sickness and their sin and everything. And then I tell them to go to confession. And if they say to me they don't know, if they're not Catholic, I tell them, "You tell Jesus you're sorry," and I talk to them. But I tell them afterwards, you know, "Why don't you go to confession?" Say, "Oh, sister, I don't know how to go to confession." I say, "You just went to me and I'm not a priest." And but if you look at, which I don't look at, but go look at Oprah Winfrey and Spring, whatever you call them, all these people are telling all their sins and horrors. I said, thank God I'm a Catholic. I can go to the confessional and guaranteed if I try to amend my ways that I'm forgiven. I don't have to tell the whole world.
Now, you talk about healing and forgiveness, but you also point out that it's good to recall that although Jesus was kind and compassionate, he did make demands.
Yes. Yes. The Lord is not a wishy-washy, soft. He does ask us. He said to that scene in the Gospel when he raised the person, he said, "Go and sin no more." And you know, we forget that, you know, Jesus, while he loves us and he healed physically, his first mission wasn't physical. I tell people, you know, the most powerful ministry of healing is the proclamation of the gospel. I mean, and that is the most powerful in the church. And what does that do? It transforms you. And what Jesus, when the priest gets up on a Sunday to preach the gospel, we're guaranteed that Jesus is speaking, and it's very demanding. In the Catholic Church, he says a lot of hard things. And remember what he said in the parable, but the goats on the one side and the sheep on the other.
Right. Now, in the Sacrament of the Eucharist, you say about how the devil doesn't want us to listen to the church state. People seek a religion of their own, making a smorgasbord religion. I guess the cafeteria Catholicism we hear about sometimes. But in the Sacrament of Confirmation, which is one sometimes it seems like it kind of gets lost in exactly what's the idea behind this. But you say that parents are sometimes afraid to speak out and condemn such a lifestyle as contrary to the teachings of Christ. You're talking about like young people living together, etc. Why is it that you think people are afraid to speak out?
Well, I
think good Catholic families.
Oh yes, I think that today we have this political correctness, and it's your business, it's not mine. And parents are afraid that, you know, well, I don't want to hurt my children. You know, they'll reject me. And I often say, I'll give you an example now, and this is, you know, because of a healing ministry I have, people call me up because they're dying, we'll say. And say, for example, they're dying of AIDS. This is it. Now, this is me, typical example. And they have AIDS. And I'll say to them, they're at the other end of the phone, desperate. They're about, in a really bad stage. And I'll say, well, how'd you get AIDS? People say, you don't ask them, do you? I said, of course I do, because you could have cancer, leukemia, anything. We're all going to die. Dying is not the problem, it's how we die. So if they say to me, they got it through permissive sex with another man, or permissive sex, or drugs, I say to them, now, can I ask you a question? Do you think, can you be honest with me? Are you happy with that life? And they'll say no. I say, do you feel so? And I say, that's all you have to tell Jesus, and I'll get you a priest. Would you confess? Because the church doesn't reject you, and you can be healed. I don't know if you'll be physically. Do you know, Doug? Many of those people have come back to me and said, Sister Briege, thank you for speaking the truth to me. Because you see, I mean, many times people allow people to go to their deathbed and don't really help them to confront the truth.
Right. Yeah, just before we go, let me use this quote from your Sacrament of Confirmation when you're talking about it. We deny Christ when we say it's all right to take drugs. I thought this was an interesting way of saying it. We deny Christ when we say it's all right to have an abortion. To deny Christ is to choose the ways of the world and taunt Christ. So actually going along with the world is to deny Christ.
Oh yes, of course it is, yes. Because Christ told us, and I have this friend, Anne, who's lay apostle, and she's a beautiful thing in one of her books of vision, and it talks about that, when we get discouraged, the reason, if we keep looking at the world, we're going to get discouraged, but we have to face heaven and think, our encouragement comes from the Lord, not from the world.
Well, getting great encouragement from you and knowing you're on our side praying for us is
God
wonderful.
bless.
Great to have you here on the program.
Thank you very much.
And back on EWTN, the author of Miracles Do Happen. Of course, her latest book, it's Sister Briege McKenna, and the author of The Power of the Sacraments, published by Servant Books, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Highly recommended. Check it out. Check us out next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.